Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of 17 Minutes of Science. We are definitely happy to be back this week after our brief hiatus last Tuesday. For those of you tuning in for the first time, my name is Anna Milinkovich, and I'm a technical solutions and application scientist with In Vivo Biosystems. Joining me this week is Kimberly Richardson, and our discussion today will focus on a combination of healthcare, patient advocacy, and a little bit of policy. Kimberly joins us from her base in Chicago, where her advocacy work for both cancer patients and cancer research has been very instrumental in the development of the Survivors Advising Scientists education program. And this is an educational program model that connects young investigators with cancer patients, survivors, research advocates, and allies to both increase their scientific knowledge and also create a feedback loop from the patient to the researcher. Now, Kimberly identified this gap between patient and researcher when undergoing her own treatment and has since worked tirelessly to create an educational framework that can be adopted on a national scale. So welcome, Kimberly, and thank you again for your time in joining us today. I'd like to hand it over to you to hear firsthand from you about your background and your experiences, and specifically, in pinpointing this gap. And then perhaps we can dive into some of the questions on our plate.
So. Okay. Well, thank you, Anna. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Kimberly Richardson. I'm here in Chicago, born and raised. In 2013, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, a rare form, granulosa cell tumor cancer. And throughout both my treatment and particularly through treatment, I noticed and felt that there was a disconnect between myself and my oncologist, asking lots of questions, not getting as many answers, and additionally not having as much information on the internet about this rare form of cancer. And so once I finished treatment, was very much interested in where is the information that someone like myself, who first is in a rare cancer category, and then within that rare cancer have another rare form, another rare subtype, where would I start to find information? And so reaching out to advocacy groups and trying to find out more information, it became very clear to me that there's a gap of information for patients and caregivers and even new advocates as it relates to the cancer research. When I first got started, I was in policy advocacy, which was a lot of going to the Hill and talking to elected officials and talking to them and persuading them to increase funding around ovarian cancer research. But then I kind of realized I didn't really know that much about the actual research myself. And so when I began to dig in, that's when I realized there's this language that that researchers use that I don't think that the average patient or caregiver knows that language. And so I was able to, over several years of doing advocacy, I was able to get involved with the Cancer Center here in Chicago and unite with a few enthusiastic students about putting some modules together where we talk about all the basics that it takes for anyone who is engaged in scientific research or going to a conference, either whether it would be scientific or medical, where they could actually understand what those scientific posters say and the meaning behind that research.
Yeah, that is a very interesting concept. And I think, again, we touched on it when we connected earlier about that idea of a very specific language for science, and likewise a very specific language potentially, for clinicians in the medical field, and how, those bubbles exist very separate from each other, and definitely separate from, the language that a patient understands and wants to hear. So this actually brings us to our very first question, and I do have our handy dandy timer set.
Yep.
But kind of as a patient and a survivor yourself, you have this opportunity to function as a bit of a translator of sorts, again, between patients and researchers. So kind of how do you think this has helped you to have an impactful voice on both sides of that conversation?
Well, prior to my diagnosis, I ran a non-for-profit which did a lot of economic development research. And so I was a bit familiar with experimental design. And so when I began to really look at scientific posters, I said, this is a language that needs to be broken down. Aside from being an executive director, I was also an adjunct professor. So the teacher in me felt that this needed to be broken down in easy to understand language. And once you do that, from my sort of community development background, education is empowerment. And so in my mind, breaking this information down into easy to understand language translates to policy. When we understand how cancer research is done, cancer patients, as the living expert, can add their layer of understanding and be able to persuade better those who make those decisions around funding, those that make the decisions around how a research design is created, how a study is conducted. But at the end of the day, the research is about the cancer patient. And if we don't understand that language, everyone is just still operating in silos and still doesn't get to what I believe is the core of the answer toward the cure.
Yeah, that's a very unique way of looking at it, but I think a very necessary one. And kind of on top of that, you kind of underscore the point of it's not a one size fits all concept. How people learn and how people understand and how people absorb information.
Absolutely. So that's one of the things we wanted to ensure with the training modules, that it was bi-directional. Oftentimes when we go to conferences or we are on webinars, someone is talking at us, right? And then we're taking down notes. But as cancer patients, in order for us to really absorb information, it has to be a bi-directional conversation. And the way we attempted to do that with the modules were first to let the students, the MD, PhD students, create the models based on their background, expertise, and educational way of learning. And then we gave those modules to patient advocates nationwide and asked them to evaluate it. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what's difficult. What slide makes sense? What slide doesn't make sense? The patient advocates were able to do that, and even down to the most minute of things like, you talk too fast. Anything that would take away from their ability to learn, right? And so that conversation was then put in written form to the students. They took that information in and made evaluative changes where necessary. And the really cool part about that process was that the students then wrote back to each one of the advocates and said, thank you for these recommendations. Here are where we made changes, and here are where we could not make changes, and here are the reasons why. So again, that level of bi-directional teaching is so important to this type of process. And I'm really super proud that both the patient advocates and the scientists were right in tune with one another when it comes to that type of work.
That's amazing. It's definitely, you see the necessity of this kind of constant flow of conversation just to keep fine tuning things. That's awesome.
Exactly.
And this actually brought us right into our second question. You absolutely touched on it already, is just what the process was like of starting, this program, the excuse me, it's a mouthful for me. Survivors Advising Scientists educational program. The process and, any specific challenges that you may have had to tackle that were a surprise maybe?
No,
and you can say no if there's not.
If there was a surprise, I think there was I may be speaking for the students, but I think for the students, when we talked about it initially, they were like, oh yeah, no problem. We'll put those slides together. And then when they got feedback from, pages of feedback from patient advocates, it was like, oh, I thought I did explain that in my easiest to understand language. So that gave them a chance to see, oh, there's another layer of me that could be exposed. My humanity can come through my research. And I think that's the most powerful lesson of all for all of us that we learn through this process. Mm-hmm. There's no like big I's and little U's. We're all experts in our way. It's just that the patient is the living expert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, yeah, pointing out the idea of humanity behind all of this definitely is a very moving concept. For sure.
Yeah, I think we get lost in that. You know, this is cancer research and everybody wants to be super serious about what they do. And then, you know, the cancer patient is progressing through a treatment plan, and that's not nice. So, you know, we all forget that that's the thing that connects us as human beings. This desire to do something as it relates to cancer research. Almost every scientist, if you ask them, have some real reason why they chose cancer research, and it is related back to humanity. So it's either a grandparent or some relative that passed away from a particular cancer. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, there's personal motivation and yeah, there's humanity behind that. So you touched on also, we're getting into our line of questions, which is, I love this conversation style versus, you know, question 1, question 2. But, you know, you touched on some of the surprising findings. Were there maybe any assumptions that were actually confirmed after running through the modules with the researchers and, you know, the advocates and patients?
Well, we did have a few patient advocates. Like I said, they were all nationwide. And so I think some things that sort of were striking to me was the level of contact that certain patient advocates had already had. If they were already patient advocates, how many of them actually had real relationships with researchers in certain parts of the states, particularly the advocates that participated from the South, haven't had as many relationships with researchers as the Midwest or are the ones who participated from the East Coast.
Okay, that's very interesting.
So it begs the difference that there's a gap there as well.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that there should be more connections for those patient advocates across cancer types in the southern states, particularly at cancer centers down there.
Yeah, so that's, you know, highlighting an immediate result and an immediate impact from just, you know, the initial round of doing this kind of work. Yeah. Which already is, you know, a huge step and an actionable thing that you can chase up on.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotal, but still, I think it's important for those patient advocates down there to say, you know, this was just one step for us to learn more. And now how can we get more and more connected to either cancer centers or advocacy organizations or to conferences in some meaningful way where we can learn more.
Yeah. So this also touches on the concept of, you know, scaling and growing the program. Yes. So yeah, I mean, I love the excitement on your face because it is exciting. So tell us about, you know, your vision and the future of the program and, you know, the impacts you hope to see. I know we touched on before on hopefully getting it to a national scale and like more actively and more solidly. So definitely please tell us about that.
I am excited about it because not only are the students interested in continuing to do training modules, they are putting these exercises as a part of their F30 training grants, research grants. They just want to be involved. They'll be doing modules like once a month for us. But right now, I'm just left a meeting yesterday where we're looking at the clinical trials, and our clinical trials team at the Cancer Center are developing modules like straight from my experiences from coming from different conferences where, you know, I've always had these notes and went, well, why is this happening? And why didn't they answer this? Or why wasn't this question raised? And so again, trying to find that way of hearing information from my own ears and then trying to translate that and say, would a caretaker or a patient who's just recently diagnosed, if would they know how to search out this information on clinical trials? Would they know to ask their oncologist upon diagnosis? Do they even know where to find information about clinical trials? And then, of course, for persons of color, we're also dealing with those issues of mistrust. And so there is so much that needs to be done around the education of clinical trials. And so I'm really happy to announce we'll be doing about 4 or 6 modules around clinical trials, and they'll be ready early in the fall.
Oh,
so aside from modules, we're trying to really expand, because the whole idea is not to just to train, but it's to empower. So if we have all these training modules, how would that take a patient advocate to the next level? Now that patient advocate can participate in a research design. They can sit around the table and do more ovarian cancer or other cancer proposals and reviews. They could publish, right? They can do posters at scientific and medical conferences. It's just the application of what you learn. And that's really where I see the future of Survivors Advising Scientists, that educational program. That's where I see it going.
That's fantastic. And yeah, just getting, again, at the end of the day, it's the empowerment of education, like you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, and that has such broad-reaching effects. So I don't know, the concept of education in any sense is really near and dear to my heart, so I can fully stand behind everything you're doing, and it makes me excited.
When it comes to cancer patients, we need to be able to, there shouldn't be platitudes around shared decision making. It should be real.
Right.
And it can only be real if we have a shared language, right? Then when you tell me something, I can, as an oncologist, I can hear that information, and then I can make an intelligent decision.
Right.
And I think that's what's missing.
And, and everybody that is in the conversation then feels like they are included, that they are on top of it, that they aren't, waiting in the background to try and raise their hand later at some point. It's a little more holistic for everyone that might be involved, it sounds like, which is great.
Yeah.
And kind of this, we've got about a minute left, so I know it goes by really fast. But going back to the idea of, growing and expanding this program, I have so many questions now. I did pick one, but you touched initially on, when we spoke earlier, on a virtual poster challenge. And I think
thank you for that.
Goes a bit towards that. So let's touch on that.
Yes, really quickly. We announced that yesterday. The whole idea was something that I came up with in April, and a shout out to the UIC Cancer Center that supports all of my ideas. I just love you guys for that. But I'm interested, because of COVID-19, these students didn't get an opportunity to really participate in any spring symposiums or go to ASCO or sort of get that whole experience of doing their posters. And so we just tried to take the in-person competition and make it virtual. And so we're starting here in Chicago at our cancer center. And the hope is that we can challenge other cancer centers nationwide to do so as well. I'm sure these students are ready to go back to school, but I'm sure they would really like to talk about their research too. So we're looking forward to this challenge.
Okay. So how long does the challenge last? What's the end date?
They have about a week to turn around their audio presentations to us. And then the coolest part about it is that they're going to be patient advocates that are going to be reviewing the audio presentations. So a large part of the criteria is going to be based on how well they can present their poster in easy to understand language.
Perfect.
We have some faculty judges, of course, that are going to be judging on scholarly content. But once again, it's how survivors get an opportunity to interact with scientists. And just again, as the Cancer Center allows me to try out all these initiatives, it's an amazing time for me.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun for everyone involved and hopefully super educational as well. Um, thank you for that. And I think you heard the timer go off. So unfortunately, that's the last question that we have time for.
Well, thanks to the team to help me put the virtual challenge together. Don't want to leave anybody out. I didn't do this by myself.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. And I do want to say, if we can get, let me back up. If we can, we'll add a link to the modules for everybody when we share the video, so that if anyone that is interested can access those directly and, you know,
Cool.
run through them if they want, and hopefully help spread the word as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for having me for these 17 minutes plus. I appreciate the time, Anna.
Yeah, of course. So Kimberly Richards, everyone, thank you. And we will see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.